Hey guys, this is miicrow here. I wanted to make a video about the New World beta because I saw a lot of questions about it and kind of update everyone with where New World's at, where I'm at, and kind of go into more details there. Since New World's kind of been in a stale state, I've been playing a few other games. I've been playing a lot of Albion. I did a lot of like kind of self-learning projects along the way, so I learned how to use APIs to basically create databases to optimize profit margins for a bunch of market stuff. So I've been teaching myself a lot of stuff on the side. And a lot of the stuff has been focused towards like improving my own career rather than focusing on you guys for a bit because the content drought's been here. But now we're kind of back. I want to see how much interest there is in New Road at the moment. And if there is interest, we'll continue to make some content as much as AGS seems to not support me nowadays. And if there's not interest, then I'll just move on to other things that I also find interesting. So going into here with the beta, there's a beta for New World, for those of you that are not aware, that is targeted towards PC players and I believe console players as well. There was a previous closed beta that was targeted towards console players that we got some discussions on, and on top of all of this, there's also a secret NDA build that I have sources that are saying is likely the final build that is coming out for New World when this official release launches, that is also out right now and is being tested by people under NDA. So changes to this open beta I think will be very limited. There would have to be very strong feedback for there to be a lot of changes from the open beta at this point to the live beta. So with that being said, I want to get into this. So this open beta is going to be running from September 13th to September 16th, but because this has a pre-download available, this info from the beta has already been data mined, and that information is already displayed on sites like New World Database. So if you go to New World Database, big shout out to the creators there. They always do a really good job, and as well to other data miners. If you go from here to the live tab to the open beta tab, you could see a lot more interest in this tab than you do in the live tab, and a lot more people are just generally looking at the information that is present here, and they're trying to use that to get a head start on markets when the actual game comes out, as well as identify what has changed, if AGS is changing their direction from a data mine perspective, or are they continuing with the same direction that they've gone with for the past couple of years, and just overall what the kind of philosophy is from both a game balance and from an itemization standpoint. So getting into this a bit, there's been a lot of sentiment lately that I'm sure a lot of people have seen on Reddit, if they're familiar with the New World subreddit, where people have been looking at this and they're realizing that there's a lot of time-gated content with this upcoming beta, and that content from that beta is, from what I've heard from sources, is likely to remain there when this game comes to live. So this beta content, and like just for people that are unfamiliar with how data mines work, basically the actual in-game files that you download contain information that can be decoded, and that information contains a mapping of everything that exists in the game, and we could use that information to identify everything that has changed for that build in the game. This does not predict what will happen in future builds, but if history is to tell, a lot of things that are found in these betas and like in this within these data mining projects are not adjusted. And on top of this, there's only one other known build before this build kind of comes to live later in October. So there's not a lot of time for AGS to make changes, and that's mostly on purpose. What the goal of this open beta is to build hype for the game, as well as for AGS to test things, but to be honest, it's not mostly to test things. If they wanted for people to test things for this open beta, it would not be level capped to level 30. This is level capped to level 30, so people focus on the new player experience, because from AGS's standpoint, from a financial standpoint, it makes sense to focus on that new game experience, because if people get over a certain marker for retention, AGS can count that as revenue and people cannot refund the game. It's a little bit of a pessimistic take, but that's kind of how games have been marketed recently. There's been other sources or other games that have also gone for a similar tactic where it's sort of scammy, but at the end of the day, New World does have a really good 0 to 65 experience. The problem with New World historically has been the after 65 experience, in my opinion. When the game first came out, there were a lot of concerns about the content being relatively repetitive, and there have been a lot of changes that have adjusted that, and I think this version of the game is going to try to invite some of those people back, as well as try to grab hold of new people with the console release and just try to let them enjoy the beginning game of New World without focusing on too much on the later game content from New World itself. That being said, there are a few late game things that have changed. There is now a new PvP zone, which you can see in the bottom left here of CK. This is a zone that basically everything that you gather will be dropped on death that is unique to that zone. So there's materials that you can gather there, and if you die, that should be dropped on death. This is something that we're going to see starting tomorrow. The major thing to note here is there's a few entrances to this area. You have this like kind of top entrance down. You have this kind of middle entrance, which there's like maybe a way to swim across this. That part we're not as sure about. And then there's also this part at the bottom that you can enter. All of these entrances are choke points that will likely be heavily contested, because if you get materials from within this zone, you need to find a way out, and you have to choose one of these paths. So it's very likely you will get ganked in one of these areas. And while this is supposed to be an FFA experience, this is not a game like Albion with the Mist, where you cannot easily identify players that are in this zone, if that makes sense. So for example, say we have 3 people. We have player A, we have player B, and we have player C. Say player A and player B know each other, and then both of these players can see player C. The player A and player B can go ahead and team together to kill player C, and then either split the loot or fight each other after. And that idea of like third partying or teaming up is something that AGS has not taken action to try to counter, and they're instead hoping that this problem will not exist. Time will tell if this problem will exist, but that's something that a lot of people have given feedback to AGS, and AGS has not necessarily taken that feedback and done anything with it. And that's something that is worth being aware of from this as a PvP experience. But in terms of the large goal of this, I think the main idea of this PvP island is to have a more solo-esque friendly content available, because a lot of the PvP content in the endgame is group-based. The only form of like solo content that completely exists is duels, and that's not really incentivized. There's no betting system present within duels in New World, which is present in most other MMOs. So there's not like a big way for people to want to get into this space as a competitiveness. There are tournaments that are held for duels if people are interested in those, and while those are interesting to me, the amount of bans that are present within these tournaments is kind of crazy. For instance, they will ban roughly like 10 to 20 build/combos that are somewhat infinite, and because the game is not really balanced for duels, it makes it difficult. So we'll see a lot of those builds present within this PvP island. A lot of them are cheese-oriented stun lock builds. We'll also likely see a lot of ranged builds like muskets and like kind of those basically all the sweaty builds that are oriented to winning the 1v1 and not necessarily taking a fair fight, but taking a fight that's advantageous for you. All those builds are likely to be present. We can cover those in a new video if those are interested, but that's something that's going to be likely present with this PvP island. The other thing that is coming out is a raid. That raid I've heard is actually pretty good from people that have played it. I don't know if we have an image within here. I have images that were leaked about it, but I don't think I can show those on here without getting demonetized, so I'm not going to show those. But the raid is relatively good. There's 3 encounters, so you could think of it as like 3 different spots. To me, it's sort of like, when did Destiny come out? Sorry, this is sort of an aside, but when Destiny 1, Destiny 1 came out on September 9th, 2014, so that's like, what, 10 years ago? I would say it's like roughly 3/4 of the quote-unquote goodness of a Destiny raid, and that's like 10 years old. So like if you think about the first Destiny raid that came out, like it's been a while, but it's about that same size. Like you have 5 people that go into that. With Destiny it was 6, and there's 3 different encounters. The bosses are relatively stationary in New World. I believe they're actually just completely stationary in this case. So a lot of the stuff is a little bit less interactive, but it's apparently a good raid, at least for New World standards. So that's something you have to look forward to from a PvE perspective. but these two forms of content, that raid and this PvP zone, are the majority of the content that's coming out of this. And I want to kind of get into the data mine to look at that more so. So as a reminder, I'll put this site in the description. If you go to New World Database, you don't have to type out the .info, and then you hit Open Beta, you could see all the stuff I'm about to point out here. There are two main drops. The Gorgonite Inductor, which comes from the raid, is one of those drops. The Golden Crest Coconut is the PvP-oriented drop. Now, if you look at these drops, you can see that they're used in recipes. They're used to upgrade gear to 725, which will also take an armor matrix. And it will take a chromatic seal, which will effectively time gate this. And then it will also take dark matter, which a lot of people have a lot of if you've been playing the game for a while. If you have not been playing the game for a while, it can be a little bit difficult to get. It's relatively easy to get from like a raid, though. The raids tend to give a lot of this, so that's something else that you can kind of look forward to there. And then the other thing that this is used for as well is for this Gorgon Essence. This Gorgon Essence is used to create Gorgonite gear. You'll also need this Gorgon's Eye and a few other recipes to kind of get the economy going. If I go back to the homepage here, I've noticed this page lags a bit, but if I go back to the homepage and navigate through, not there, to here, then it loads right away for some reason. And this is used to create this other gear that's called Gorgonite. If you look at any of this gear, the thing that you will immediately notice is that all of it has Magnify, and that is the only option. So all 725 gear score items effectively have Magnified Lock. The issue here is previously you had 600-ish total stats. You could technically get over this if you went into multiple categories. With this up-and-coming build, you're going to have 650 stats. With Magnify, how it works is you can dedicate Magnify towards one stat, or you could dedicate Magnify towards a split if multiple stats are equal. So for most builds in this case, when you have 650 gear score, usually you're going into 2 to 3 builds, right? So if you were to do, 650, just open up a calculator here, keep it simple. If we do 650 divided by 2, that's 325 stats into 2 categories. Or you can, go into 3, and then you're going to have like 215 into 3 categories. That doesn't let you be really creative with the attributes and kind of locks you into some hard thresholds, which is a concern of a lot of players and something that I've seen on Reddit a few times in the recent things. On top of all this, this content or these drops are time gated. So in terms of like the armor matrix, that's a time gate. The scarabs aren't a time gate, but are a soft time gate because you have to gather them from Brim. The actual drops themselves, I believe, are time gated as well. So, and I think you can only get like 1 per week, or it's roughly that amount of time. So it's like I think it says here, right? Yeah, limit expiration 7 days. So you can only get one of these for every 7 days. The golden cursed coconut or whatever. So all this content is effectively time gated. How you upgrade your gear is time gated. It just overall is like AGS is trying to put the brakes on people's progression. So they're trying to elongate this content to make it so that players have to play longer to hit max. Now, to me, this is more so a problem that AGS doesn't have enough content. So they're trying to elongate this content artificially, as well as limiting the amount of ways to get this endgame oriented gear, right? Because we go back to the essence here, we look at a recipe, all this gear is stuff that will take time to progress, and it is also, if you look at the armoring requirements here, it requires armoring skill level 0. So they are effectively telling crafters, hey, you can craft, or you could use your crafting to get these time-gated materials, but after you get these time-gated materials, we're not going to let you craft this gear to sell to other players. We're instead going to make this experience time-gated for players, and I think this was done for a few reasons. The first one that comes to mind is Warloggers. This is something for people that are not as familiar, is one of the endgame contents for New World in terms of mass PvP is a content called War, which is a 50v50 game mode, and players that participate in War tend to have multiple characters spread amongst multiple servers, and they tend to not be as active. So by limiting their accessibility to endgame gear by time gating it, this prevents warloggers from being as oppressive on multiple servers. And this is something that AGS has kind of done over time to counteract how dominant warloggers have been and how limiting the exposure to the endgame content has been to war because of warloggers dominating zones. So because people are not able to effectively get territories on the map, instead of actually making like a improved system for war, like saying having a queue so people can participate in wars whenever they want, or kind of decreasing the barrier to entry by having more servers, AGS has kind of reduced the amount of servers over time for various reasons, and that's kind of led to a problem that they've solved by time gating in the past. So AGS is going back to the same tactic of time gating, and I think warloggers are a major reason for that. The other reason for that is this just extends the amount of duration that people can spend with the content, right? So if you increase the amount of time, then people will effectively generate more revenue for AGS because they're more engaged with the content, they're more likely to buy skins, etc. So most of these seem to be done from a kind of a business perspective. To me, this is sort of like getting into a mobile gaming-esque situation where you're trying to encourage people to log on every day. If people log on every day, then this number goes up. If this number goes up, then AGS makes more money. AGS gets to keep their jobs, and people are generally happy if big number goes up in business. Now, from a historical standpoint, in terms of like how this content will be perforated throughout New World's future life cycle, I think we could expect one big content patch per year because that's what they've done since this game has come out. You could see some peaks coming back. So we started off with like, 900k people playing at the same time. Then it was like 130 at the next expansion. Then it was like 70. I would expect that we're going to keep with that trend and kind of reduce this by roughly half. And we're going to be roughly 30 to 40k pop on top of pulling in new players. So maybe we hit like 50k for a period of time, maybe 60k. Like it will be in that ballpark. So we could expect like probably a good amount of players to come back to New World after this patch. The question is, will it be sustainable? You have time-gated content in terms of both PvP and PvE endgames, and I don't know if that's going to be enough to kind of keep people around for the next year when AGS will likely deliver more content. Now, the real question here is like how often will AGS learn from their mistakes at all? Will they continue to deliver balance changes quickly? In terms of this beta itself, they are delivering some balance changes that I think I'll cover in likely another video. But if you go through the skill builder tab, you can see a lot of changes here. The major one I want to highlight because this changes a lot of how the game works is Constitution 300 Con got changed to only working with heavy attacks instead of giving you grit for all light attacks and heavy attacks. 300 Con will change how people interact with both PvE and PvP. From a PvP perspective, there will be less kind of spammy oriented melee builds, and everything's going to be a little bit more dynamic in theory in terms of people could be blocking attacks, it could be having to dodge attacks more, or they will be having to go for heavy attacks to try to break blocks. This in theory will lead to more creative PvP engagements. The downside to this is staggering effects get a really big buff when it comes to this. So, and a lot of those builds tend to be like relatively strong right now. One of those builds is like Flail. Like Flail is not super strong right now, but is like very strong and oriented in terms of stagger. A Spear has a lot of different forms of stagger in terms of like sweeping someone, which would normally be prevented if you have grit. That will no longer be prevented. Stuff like Javelin will no longer be prevented, as well as any stuns will also go through grit, and so both of those oriented builds will effectively be stronger with this patch. I'll probably go into a different video and talk about more of the balance changes, but I wanted to keep this one a little bit higher level, talk about some of the new stuff that's coming, talk about kind of the magnify oriented problem. You see some drops that are not magnify oriented, but it's not as many. Most of the crafted gear will be magnify oriented, so you can use non-crafted non-magnify gear, or you could use the crafted magnify gear when it comes to this endgame experience. And the endgame loop seems relatively limited. With that being said, it will be interesting to see if AGS changes any of these. If you guys have any thoughts in terms of if New World is worth pursuing or continuing to make content for, please let me know. Because if this game is not something that you guys still have a passion for, then I will move on to other things. If not, then we can continue to put out a little bit of content here for New World for the near future. And with that being said, let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys in the next video.